Power in Wolflands had always pretended to be sacred when it was simply afraid. Men called cruelty tradition when they feared losing control, and councils called coercion duty when they wanted obedience, dressed in silver law. Celeste Frostborn had learned that lesson by watching women stand very still while elders spoke over them, by hearing vows treated like ownership contracts, by understanding that silence kept a roof over your head until the night silence became another kind of cage. In the Moon Temple, beneath carved beams darkened by centuries of ritual smoke, she stood in white linen and knew that one cut of a blade could either anoint her life or end it as she knew it. The hall smelled of cedar ash, hot iron, and moon oil. Torches burned with ordinary orange light in black sconces shaped like wolves in mid-howl. The ancestral floor ran in concentric circles of pale stone, each ring scored with runes that had been polished by generations of bare knees. Above her, crystal bells hung from braided chains and chimed whenever the night wind found a crack in the temple dome. Dante Duskwalker stood opposite her in ceremonial black, broad-shouldered, beautiful, and cold enough to frost glass. He did not look at her mouth or her hands. He looked at her like she was a test he already regretted taking. His mother, Luna Maris, watched from the elder dais with tight lips and ringed fingers braced against the carved armrest. 5 council elders flanked her in iron-gray robes. Witnesses packed the side aisles, whispering behind gloved knuckles. The high cantor lifted the bloodline knife. Its edge was so fine that moonlight crawled along it in a thin white thread. "Bride of Duskwalker," the cantor said, voice carrying through the chamber, "offer blood to the ancestral seal. Let the runes judge fitness. Let the line continue or end." Celeste held out her left hand. Her wrist trembled once. She told herself it was cold. Dante's gaze finally found hers, and contempt sat there without disguise. "Do not embarrass me," he said quietly, lips barely moving. The words landed harder than the blade. She thought of the 3 years she had spent trying to earn that man's softness. 3 years of shrinking herself into usefulness so no one would call her difficult. She lowered her eyes and answered, "I will not." The cantor drew the knife across her palm. Pain came fast and clean, then warm blood welled in a bright line. "Press to seal," he commanded. She knelt at the central rune, the one reserved for Luna binding, and set her bleeding hand against cold stone. The temple exploded with light. Not orange fire, not torchlight. White gold radiance burst from under her palm and raced along every carved line, faster than sight. A living lattice of flame that climbed pillars, vaulted the dome, and leapt from sconce to sconce until every torch became a vertical spear of silver fire. Crystal bells screamed as heat hit them. Wolves dropped to their knees as if a mountain had settled on their backs. Even elders gasped and clutched their throats. The air thickened, charged and metallic, and a pressure no one had language for rolled through the hall in silent waves. Celeste jerked her hand back. Blood smeared across the rune, glowing like molten starlight. Her scarless skin blistered at the cut, then sealed halfway and flared bright again, pulsing with her heartbeat. The cantor stumbled backward and fell. Someone shouted, "Contain it!" Another voice cried, "Moon preserve us!" Dante did not move to her. He stared at the burning runes with hunger and fear fighting in his face. Then he spoke, loud enough for every witness. "This is corruption." The words struck the hall like a second blow. Celeste pushed to her feet, knees shaking. "Dante, I did exactly what the rite asked." "You infected a sacred seal." His voice sharpened. "You carry a curse." Luna Maris rose from the dais. "End the ceremony," she snapped. "Now." The silver flames did not obey her. They burned high, steady, almost orderly, as if listening to some deeper command. Celeste turned in a slow circle, disoriented. Every face she knew had gone distant. Women she had cooked beside looked away. Men who had once bowed in greeting stared as though she had grown fangs in front of them. She heard herself ask, too quietly, "Are you rejecting me?" Dante stepped down from his mark and wiped an invisible speck from his cuff. "I reject you publicly, before witnesses, under temple law. I will not claim a cursed bride." The bells overhead still quivered. The runes still blazed. Celeste's chest hollowed out so abruptly she felt lightheaded. "You promised," she said. "I promised Aluna." His gaze swept the glowing floor, then came back hard. "Not a weapon I cannot control." The cantor found his feet and raised a shaking hand. "By elder authority and alpha declaration, Celeste Frostborn is dismissed from Duskwalker claim pending spiritual review." "Dismissed!" Elder Varric barked from the dais, pale with fright. "Brand it correctly. She is a disgrace risk. Dangerous. Remove her from holy grounds." Celeste stared at him. "I have served this pack since I was 15. And tonight," he said, "you endangered everyone in this hall." Two temple wardens approached, eyes fixed on the floor, not her face. One draped a rough wool cloak around her shoulders to cover the ceremony linen now stained with blood and ash. The other bound her cut hand with stiff gauze that immediately spotted red. Dante stepped aside as they led her past him. He did not touch her. He did not even lower his voice when he said, "If you cross back into my house, you will be restrained." The humiliation was so complete it felt strangely quiet, like snow falling over ruins. They pushed through the temple gates into night air that tasted of pine and frost. Behind her, the doors boomed shut. The silver fire still leaked through the seams, turning the stone threshold into a thin, glowing outline against the dark. Celeste stood on the outer steps, barefoot in freezing dust, ritual cuts stinging through damp bandages. For a moment she could not move. Her body had entered that stunned state where pain came in distant pulses and thought lagged half a breath behind reality. "Run now. Do not look back. Keep breathing." She went down the mountain road with no escort and no provisions. The moon hung low and clear, painting the switchbacks in bone-white light. Wind knifed through the wool cloak, finding every tear in the fabric. Her hand throbbed. Her ribs ached from where panic had tightened everything hard enough to bruise from within. By the time midnight tipped toward morning, she had put 5 ridges between herself and the temple. She knew these border paths from old trade routes. One branch led to neutral caravans, one to the marsh settlements, and one, narrow and steep, cut through Forbidden Ravine into Nightshade territory. Wolves told stories about Nightshade as if it were less a pack and more an oath carved into mountain stone. Trespass there meant swift judgment, often lethal. She took the ravine trail anyway. At the 7th bend, voices rose behind her. "Track is fresh." She cannot have gone far. Dante's enforcers, at least 3 by scent and footfall, maybe more. Their lanterns flickered through trees, small orange wounds in the dark. Celeste flattened against wet rock and clamped a shaking hand over her mouth. She listened. One voice, familiar and smug, belonged to Kellen, Dante's beta. "Orders changed. The Alpha wants her returned intact. No marks on the face. Hands if needed." Another answered. "He cast her out." "He reconsidered," Kellen said, "after the elders examined the runes. Move. Intact. Hands if needed." The tight knot behind her ribs loosened and snapped into clarity. Rejection had never meant freedom. It had been a tactic, public distance for private control. If they caught her, she would disappear into a locked room and become a source of blood for men who called extraction ritual. She ran. Branches lashed her cheeks. Gravel slid under bare feet. The ravine narrowed, then opened into a shelf of black stone overlooking a river glazed with moonlight. A boundary marker stood at the edge, obsidian pillar etched with the nightshade crest, half wolf, half-crown, cut so deep the grooves held old silver paint. Behind her, Kellen shouted, "Celeste, stop, and this stays lawful." She laughed once, breathless and broken. Lawful. A crossbow bolt struck stone near her ankle and skittered sparks. She flinched, then vaulted the marker and slid down the far slope, grabbing brush to keep from tumbling outright. The earth changed under her hands, from dusty grit to dark loam thick with cedar roots. Nightshade land. The pursuit stopped at the crest. Enforcers cursed but did not cross. Kellen's voice carried over the drop, sharp with frustrated fear. "You have no protection there, you hear me? None." Celeste crouched behind a fallen trunk, shaking hard enough her teeth clicked, blood soaking through fresh bandage, lungs burning with cold air and panic and something fierce that felt like the first honest instinct she had trusted in years. "No," she whispered into the dark forest, to him, to herself, to every vow that had ever been used as a chain. "I have my own." Then she rose, turned deeper into Nightshade's shadow, and kept moving before dawn could find her where she knelt. The trees swallowed her within 10 strides, and the world narrowed to breath, root, and the wet sting of cold air in her throat. Nightshade territory felt older than the Duskwalker slopes, less traveled and less forgiving, as if the mountain itself had chosen not to be tamed. Cedar trunks rose like pillars in a ruined cathedral. Pale lichen caught moonlight in torn ribbons. Somewhere far below, river water struck stone in steady, indifferent force. Celeste kept one hand pressed to the bandage on her palm while the other skimmed bark for balance. Her legs shook from the run. Every few steps, the ravine spun at the edges of her vision, and she had to stop long enough to keep from collapsing. She told herself to count heartbeats, then started over when the numbers tangled. I crossed. I am here. Keep going. The words marched through her head in present tense, urgent and plain, because anything more complicated threatened to break into panic. She listened for Kellen and heard only the forest. That should have felt like safety. It felt like waiting. A low whistle cut through the dark. Not wind. A signal. She froze. 2 shadows dropped from opposite branches, landing without sound. A third emerged from a split in the rock, as if he had been carved there. Nightshade scouts wore charcoal leather and fur-lined cloaks dyed so dark they vanished between trunks. None raised a voice. None wasted motion. Their eyes tracked her hands, her feet, the blood on her bandage, the direction she had come from. The woman in front, broad-shouldered with a braid to her waist, held a short spear angled down but ready. Name. Celeste's mouth had gone dry. Celeste Frostborn. A flicker passed among them at the surname. The scout's expression did not soften. Pack. None, Celeste said. Not anymore. False answers get you dragged. The woman stepped closer and inhaled once, sharp and assessing. Duskwalker scent on your cloak. Ritual smoke. Fear. Blood. You crossed after pursuit. Celeste lifted her cut hand before anyone could accuse her of hiding weapons. I crossed for sanctuary under border law. I did not come armed. I did not come to steal. I came because if you hand me back, I will disappear into a room with no windows and they will call it tradition. Silence pulled tight. The male scout on her left circled behind, boots soft in needles. We do not owe shelter to strangers. Then execute me cleanly, she said, voice fraying. Just do not return me. The woman's gaze sharpened, then dipped to the blood seeping through gauze. Who cut you? The temple did. Celeste swallowed. And Duskwalker will cut deeper if they take me. Another whistle sounded from farther upslope, then an answering click from the scout behind her. The woman lowered her spear by an inch. On your knees. Celeste complied, body grateful and humiliated in equal measure. Cold earth soaked through the linen at her shins. The woman crouched, patted down her sides, checked her cloak seams, then held Celeste's wrist under moonlight and turned the bandage with clinical precision. "These are ritual lines," she said quietly to her team. "Recent, unhealed." The man behind Celeste muttered, "Could be bait." "Could be," the woman agreed. She stood and looked down at Celeste. "You will walk between us. You run, you bleed. You lie, you bleed more. You touch a weapon, you die where you stand." Celeste nodded once. The movement made stars spark behind her eyes. They moved uphill through a switchback carved directly into black stone. The forest thinned, revealing terraces cut into the mountain like giant steps, each ringed with low walls etched in old runes that held a faint silver glow. Watchfires burned in iron braziers, not orange, but blue-white, smokeless and steady. Wolves stood at every post, some in human form, some half-shifted with claws visible, and shoulders hunched under heavy cloaks. No one shouted. Heads turned as she passed. By the time they reached the outer gate, her feet were numb, then painfully present again as warmth from the courtyard stones met frozen skin. The gate itself was a pair of timber slabs bound in black iron, carved with the same crest she had crossed at the boundary marker. Wolf and crown fused into one line. Above it rose the Nightshade Fortress, basalt walls rising straight from the mountain spine, balconies stacked in severe tiers, windows lit by low amber lamps. It looked less like a residence and more like a vow-made architecture. The guard captain at the gate took one look at her and at the scout leader and signaled for passage without argument. "Inform the throne ward," he said. "Now." The word throne sent a chill through Celeste unrelated to weather. She was brought into an inner court paved in dark slate veined with quartz that caught the moon and made the ground look cracked with buried lightning. A dry fountain stood at center, wolves carved around its basin with mouths open to a sky that gave no water tonight. The scouts stopped there. More guards formed a loose ring, careful distance, disciplined threat. One of them, young and sharp-faced, stared openly at the blood on Celeste's sleeve. "Duskwalker female? We should send her back with an apology and a warning not to test our borders." The braid-haired scout did not turn. "You can suggest that to the Alpha yourself." The young guard's mouth shut. A door opened on the far side of the court. Conversation died as if a hand had closed around every throat at once. He crossed the threshold with no guard announcing him, tall enough that the doorway framed him like a blade. Nikolai Nightshade wore a dark tunic under a heavy coat lined in wolf fur, the collar open at his throat, forearms bare where old rune marks banded his skin in pale, silvery scars. His hair was black with streaks of winter at the temples, tied back from a face cut in hard planes, high cheekbones, straight nose, mouth made for commands he did not need to repeat. Authority moved with him, not around him. He descended 3 steps into the moonlight and stopped. Celeste looked up. The world tipped. It happened in the space between one breath and the next. Scent hit first. Cedar smoke and frost and something wild that made her pulse jump. Then heat roared under her skin despite the cold night. The scar at her palm, half-healed from temple fire, flared with sudden pain and then a thudding rhythm that did not match her own heartbeat. A pressure snapped tight between her chest and his, invisible and undeniable, like a thread drawn through both of them and pulled hard. Her knees buckled. The nearest guard lunged, reaching to keep her from hitting stone. Nikolai moved faster. He caught her forearm, then paused, grip easing the instant she flinched, as if even in that shock he had registered the recoil and corrected. Warmth flooded from the contact straight up her arm. Around them, wolves inhaled sharply in near unison. Nikolai's pupils widened, then narrowed to predatory slits. Amber bled into his irises, brightening from human hazel to molten metal. His chest expanded on one rough breath. When he spoke, His voice was low enough that only those nearest could hear, but it carried more force than a shout. "Who touched you?" Celeste stared at him, every instinct split cleanly in two. Run. Stay. Hide. Reach. Her body remembered Dante's contempt, the temple's verdict, the hands that had shoved her through cold gates. Yet this pull did not feel like ownership. It felt like recognition she had never been granted. The guard ring shifted restlessly. The young one who had spoken earlier muttered, "Alpha?" Nikolai did not look away from Celeste. "Stand down." No one moved. He lifted his free hand once, not dramatic, merely final. Alpha pressure dropped into the court like a falling wall. Slate groaned under boots. Two guards went to one knee without meaning to. The fountain basin cracked in a clean line from rim to base. I said stand down. They obeyed. Celeste's breath came thin and fast, her scar burned hotter, and a second pulse answered from the mark still raw on her palm, as if the bloodline seal had woken at the sight of him. She pressed her lips together against a wave of dizziness. I did not come to start a fight. Nikolai's gaze cut briefly to her hand, to the bruising at her wrist where old fingers had gripped too hard, to the mud on her knees and the ritual cut line hidden badly beneath gauze. Fury crossed his face so fast it might have been imagined, except the air around him seemed to tighten. "Dante Duskwalker did this," he said. It was not a question. Celeste's throat worked. "He rejected me publicly." "And hunted you privately." Nikolai's jaw flexed. "I can smell his men on the wind." For one heartbeat, the narration of the world shifted, and the court existed from inside him. The bond struck like a blade through old armor, clean and violent, ending centuries of disciplined distance in a single unwanted mercy. Mate. Not political alliance, not temporary hunger, not a strategic marriage he could survive without. Mate. And she was hurt. The knowledge came with a precision that made restraint costly. He returned to stillness by force. "Look at me," he said softer. Celeste obeyed before she could second-guess it. His eyes held hers, amber bright in moonlight, ancient and attentive at once. The pull between their chests steadied into a taut hum, no weaker, only clearer. "I am not your jailer," he said. "If you ask to leave, my gates open. If you ask for shelter, no one here will touch you without your word. Say what you choose." Her thoughts scattered and reformed, fragments sliding into a shape she did not trust yet needed. "I choose. I choose." The phrase felt unfamiliar in her own mind, then fierce. "I choose not to be handed back," she whispered. "I choose one night where I am not a ritual object." Something in his expression shifted, not pity, not triumph. Recognition. "You have that," Nikolai said. "You have more than that." The thread between them tightened once, bright and merciless as moonfire, and neither of them looked away. Nikolai released her arm first, stepping back half a pace as though the distance itself were a promise. "Tavia," he said to the scout with the long braid, "bring her to the lower infirmary. Quiet corridor. No restraints. No crowd." His gaze swept the ring of guards until each one straightened. "If anyone speaks to her like a prisoner, they answer to me." Tavia touched fist to chest and gestured for Celeste to follow. Celeste took one step, then another, feeling the bond thread stretch between her and Nikolai, like heated wire, present even when she did not look at him. She expected him to take command of her body next, to declare a claim in front of witnesses, to use the charged silence to pin her future in place. He did none of it. He stayed in the courtyard while she crossed to the inner door, and only when she vanished into the corridor did she feel him move again behind her. The infirmary sat below the western wall where mountain stone held a constant cool, its lamps shielded with thin sheets of mica that turned the light soft and honey-colored. Shelves line the room with labeled jars of dried roots, rolled bandages, and stoppered oils. The air carried crushed mint, clean linen, and iron from recently scrubbed tools. A narrow bed stood against one wall, not shackled, not bolted. A copper basin steamed on a stool beside it. Celeste stopped in the doorway. Tavia noticed and read her too quickly for comfort. "No chains in this room," she said. "Not for healing. Sit if you can." Celeste sat, hands rigid in her lap. Two healers entered, older women with silver woven into dark hair, and each waited for her nod before touching even the edge of her cloak. They cut away the soaked gauze around her palm and wrist, clicked their tongues at the ritual damage, and asked simple questions in calm voices that did not crowd her. When one reached for the torn hem at Celeste's ankle, Celeste flinched before contact. The healer drew back immediately. "My fault. I should have asked first." It was such a small correction that it hurt. Nikolai appeared at the threshold minutes later carrying a folded dark shirt and wool trousers. He remained outside the room. "For when you want dry clothes," he said, setting them on a bench within reach but not offering them hand to hand. "I will wait in the hall." Celeste stared at him, suspicious by habit. "Why?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because the bond is loud and your fear is louder. I can manage mine. You should not have to manage both." He left before she found a response. They cleaned the cuts, spread a thick salve that cooled and then burned, wrapped her hand in fresh linen, and checked the half-sealed scar where temple fire had licked too deep. The senior healer, Sana, tapped that scar with 2 fingers and frowned. "This one is not ordinary ritual burn," she murmured. "It is responding to power flow. If it spikes again, call it once." "I do not command power flow," Celeste said. Sana gave her a look that was not disbelief, merely caution. Tonight proved something commands it. When the healers withdrew, Celeste changed behind a screen and slid under blankets that smelled of cedar soap. Exhaustion hit like a dropped gate. Her body had reached the point where each muscle trembled on its own schedule. Outside the door, boots passed now and then, disciplined and distant. She counted the steps until numbers dissolved into dream. She was back in the temple, kneeling on ice instead of stone. Elders circled above with featureless faces while Dante held the bloodline knife and smiled as if kindness were a rumor he had never heard. Hands gripped her wrists from behind, forcing her palm into a rune that opened like a mouth. "Still," someone ordered. "Useful things stay still." The fire rose white and hungry. Bells screamed. The floor became iron chains heating red. She tried to pull free and found cuffs already locked, each click a verdict. Celeste bolted upright with a strangled gasp, clawing at her own wrists so hard her nails scored skin through the sleeve. The room swam in lamplight and shadow. She kicked the blanket away and hit the wall with her shoulders, breath shredding in her throat. No straps yet. They are coming. They are always coming. Keep your hands where you can see them. Do not let anyone take your left wrist first, because that is where they anchor the line. If he says your name softly, do not believe softness. Softness can be a door with a lock on the other side. You are awake. You are awake. You are in nightshade, and that might only mean a different cage with better stone. Listen for keys. Listen for metal. If you have to bite, bite hard. If you have to run barefoot again, run. Even if the corridor ends in a wall, run anyway, because choosing the wall yourself is still a choice. Celeste. Low, steady, a man's voice from below eye level, not above. She blinked through panic and focused. Nikolai sat on the floor beside the bed, back against the stone wall, knees drawn up, hands open on his thighs. No weapons, no armor. Just a plain dark tunic, sleeves rolled, rune scars visible and quiet against his skin. A strip of linen and a ceramic bowl rested beside him. The window slit showed no light yet. Night still held. "You were shouting in your sleep," he said. "Sana asked me to wake you if your pulse spiked again. I knocked. You did not hear." Celeste dragged air into her lungs and made herself look at his hands. Empty, relaxed. "Why are you on the floor?" "So, I am not looming over you when you open your eyes." The answer slid under her defenses before she could brace. She looked away first. Her wrapped palm had bled through during the nightmare, a dark flower spreading along the bandage. Nikolai tracked her glance and lifted the bowl slightly. "You reopen the cut. I can rewrap it, or I can call Sana. Your choice." A bitter laugh escaped her, thin with leftover terror. "That phrase keeps sounding like strategy." "Maybe it began there," he said. "It is still true." She hesitated, then extended her hand an inch. "You can do it." He rose slowly, giving her time to retreat, then sat on the bed's edge only after she nodded again. His movements had the control of someone used to strength and used to breaking things by accident if control slipped. He unwound the stained linen and paused when she tensed, waiting without comment until her shoulders came down by degrees. The salve smelled of sage and smoke. His fingers were warm, calloused, surprisingly precise as he cleaned the wound. "You asked why," he said after a long silence. "About the floor." Celeste watched him knot the first wrap. "Yes." He kept his eyes on her wrist, voice measured. "When I was young, my father believed fear was efficient governance. He used it on enemies first, then on allies, then on anyone who hesitated. My mother wore ceremonial jewels over bruises and called it weather. I learned what power looks like when it has no witness and no limit. I killed him when I was old enough to survive it." He tightened the second wrap, then eased his grip immediately when she flinched. "I took this throne to end that pattern, not polish it." The confession landed heavy, without self-praise. Celeste searched his profile for performance and found only fatigue and restrained anger turned inward, like a blade sheathed point first. He finished the bandage and set her hand gently on the blanket. "There is another reason," he said. "The bond urges proximity, possession, if I let it. It tells me to close distance until you cannot leave my reach. I do not trust instincts that erase someone else's will, not even sacred ones." She had no answer ready for that honesty. Nikolai leaned back, giving her space again. "You choose every step from now on, even if that step is away from me." The words sat between them, plain as stone. No poetry, no trap she could detect. Celeste tested him with the only thing she had left. "If I asked for the gate now, I would walk you there myself and place escorts only as far as you permitted. Even if Duskwalker men waited beyond the ridge?" His jaw tightened. "I would tell you the risk. I would still open the gate." She closed her eyes briefly, not in surrender but to steady the ground under her. For years she had been taught that protection and ownership were the same shape. Tonight, one man had split them apart with a single line and made room for breath. "Stay," she said, surprising herself. "Not close. Just stay where I can see you." Nikolai inclined his head once and returned to the floor. By the time the first gray seam of dawn touched the window slit, Celeste had slept in short, fragile stretches, each waking less violent than the last because he was still there, a quiet silhouette by the bed, never reaching unless she asked. At sunrise, Tavia escorted Celeste through an upper passage to the council chamber. The hall was long and vaulted, carved directly into the mountain spine, with a central table of black stone running like a frozen river from door to dais. Standards of allied packs hung along the walls, their colors dim in morning light. Frost traced the high windows in fern-like veins. 12 seats ringed the table, already occupied by nightshade captains, enforcers, and 2 neutral observers whose expressions said, They had come to measure weakness. Nikolai stood at the head chair but did not sit yet. "You are here as witness only," he told Celeste quietly. "No one questions you without your consent." She took the side seat Tavia indicated and folded her bandaged hand in her lap. The debate started before everyone settled. Captain Rourke, scarred across one cheek and broad as a door, slapped a dossier packet onto the table. "Duskwalker sent formal demand at first light," he said. "They accuse us of harboring stolen property under ritual dispute." The word property made Celeste's spine go rigid. A neutral observer, Elder Bren from the Marsh Packs, lifted his chin. "Language aside, there is legal exposure." She crossed in contested status. "Return could preserve border peace." Tavia's mouth flattened. "Return to the wolf who chased her across our marker with orders for capture." Bren spread his hands. "Alleged." Another enforcer, Ilian, leaned forward, eyes on Celeste with open disdain. We all felt the bond strike in the courtyard. Convenient timing. A rejected bride stumbles over our border, and suddenly the Alpha has sacred cause to keep her. I say, Duskwalker's narrative will spread before noon. Bewitched king, compromised throne. Hand her back with witnesses and force trial on neutral ground. Celeste stared at the table edge until the quartz vein blurred. The old reflex rose immediately. Go small. Do not draw fire. Survive the room. Nikolai finally took his seat. He let the arguments run 2 more minutes. Every accusation laid out and sharpened. He did not interrupt, did not bare fangs, did not rescue her from hearing exactly what they thought she cost. Then Ilian pushed too far. "If she remains, she is a liability with a pulse. We cannot gamble the realm on one female's." Stone cracked. The sound split the chamber like an axe strike. A fracture shot from beneath Nikolai's chair down the length of the black table, branching in white lines through polished rock. The pressure that followed dropped hard and immediate, not chaotic but absolute, pressing shoulders down, locking lungs mid-breath. Papers slid off the table as if shoved by wind, though no air moved. Nikolai's voice stayed quiet. That made it worse. "Choose your next word with care." Ilian went pale and gripped the table to keep from dropping. "My Alpha, I meant strategic risk, not insult." "Then speak like a strategist, not a butcher." Bren tried to recover the room. "No one disputes your authority. The concern is interpack optics. If Duskwalker calls conclave—" "Let them call it," Nikolai said. "She will not be transferred like cargo to soothe a coward's narrative." Rourke bristled. "And if this brings war?" Nikolai turned his palm up, claws pushing through for a heartbeat before retracting, a reminder rather than a threat. "War comes whether we kneel or stand when men like Dante smell leverage. He rejected her publicly and sent enforcers privately. He wants access to what her blood ignited. You all know it." Ilian, either brave or foolish, shoved back from the table and stood. "With respect, you are compromised. Bonded instinct clouds command. If you cannot separate female from realm, someone should." The room went still enough to hear frost tick against the windows. Ilian took one step toward Celeste. Nikolai moved so fast the motion blurred. He was between them in an instant. Forearm half shifted, dark claws arced and braced across Ilian's chest without piercing skin, a living barrier that stopped him cold. Chairs scraped as several captains rose, then froze when Nikolai's head turned slightly and the amber in his eyes burned with warning. "Protection is not compromise," he said, each word precise. "It is the first duty of this throne. Any challenge to her safety is a challenge to me. Make that challenge cleanly now, in this room, or sit down and govern." Ilian's breath came hard through his teeth. He looked from Nikolai's claws to Celeste, calculating odds, alliances, and whether principle was worth a broken body. At last he lowered his gaze. "I withdraw the challenge." Nikolai stepped back at once, claws receding. Then we proceed. The pressure lifted enough for lungs to work normally. Conversations resumed in a different register, sharper but disciplined. Motions were proposed: immediate border reinforcement, formal refusal of Duskwalker demand, petition for conclave under truth wards, and a legal brief cataloging temple irregularities. Nothing was hidden from Celeste. No one asked her to leave. When discussion turned to wording of the refusal, Nikolai looked to her across the cracked table. Celeste Frostborn, do you consent to Nightshade filing protective claim in your name until conclave judgment? Every head turned. She felt the old fear rise, then meet something new and steadier. Not courage as a blaze, courage as a handhold. I consent, she said, voice clear, with one condition. Nikolai's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile. Name it. The document states I am under protection, not possession. A beat of silence. Then Tavia thumped her fist once against the table in approval. Rourke followed. Even Bren nodded, reluctant but real. Nikolai held her gaze. Write it exactly that way. For the first time since the temple doors had closed behind her, Celeste let her shoulders lower without forcing them. The bond between them still hummed, fierce and unfamiliar, but it no longer felt like a trap laid in sacred language. It felt like a bridge she could choose to cross, one deliberate step at a time. The scribe carved her condition into wax and then into law ink, each stroke deliberate enough to make the chamber feel briefly orderly, almost sane. Then the west door slammed open. A border runner stumbled in, mud to his knees, nightshade crest torn across his shoulder. He dropped to one knee before Nikolai and held up a sealed iron tube stamped with Duskwalker black. Intercepted at the southern pass, he said, breath sawing. Courier to the neutral rings, we took 3. One burned his packet before capture. This one did not. Rourke took the tube, checked for poison runes, then snapped the seal with a knife. A sheaf of copied testimony slid onto the cracked table, along with a thin crystal shard that caught window light in a sickly green flare. Bren reached for the top page first. His eyes moved, then hardened. He filed formal accusation to every allied pack, he said. He named Celeste Frostborn as a destabilizing conduit who compelled an alpha through illicit blood sorcery. Celeste felt the room tilt again, not from weakness this time, but from recognition. Dante never shouted when quiet would cut deeper. Nikolai held out his hand. Read it aloud. Bren hesitated, then obeyed. The text was pure legal venom, polished and methodical. A rejected bride whose blood had violated temple right, an opportunistic trespass into Nightshade land, an immediate and suspicious bond display with an alpha king, proof of enchantment, grounds for emergency conclave. At the bottom, Dante requested trial by right and temporary custody transfer to prevent magical contamination of sovereign governance. Property language dressed as procedure, control wearing white gloves. Tavia swore under her breath. Ilian did not look at Celeste at all. Rourke lifted the crystal shard. Memory recording? Edited, Bren said grimly. Likely, but still persuasive to wolves who want an easy story. Nikolai nodded once. Play it. They set the shard in a basin of moonwater. Light rose from it in a wavering column. The temple appeared but cropped and cut. Celeste saw herself kneeling at the seal, saw the white gold fire erupt, saw panic in the crowd. Then the image jumped. Her own face, wild with shock, turned toward Dante. Another jump. Dante stepping back, expression arranged into noble restraint. Another jump. Celeste moving toward him, hand outstretched, and the cut ended before he rejected her, before wardens dragged her out, before the gates shut. The chamber stayed silent when the projection died. It was not a lie in the narrow sense. That made it worse. They trimmed motive and sequence, Nikolai said, left spectacle, Removed coercion. Bren rubbed his jaw. The neutral rings will read this as probable manipulation at minimum. At worst, attempted throne capture through bloodline compulsion. Celeste stared at the water basin until her reflection steadied. He is not defending his name, she said quietly. He is making me transferable. Nikolai looked at her, sharp and intent. Say the rest. She met his gaze. If Conclave grants custody for trial, Dante gets legal access to my blood under ritual pretext. One sealed chamber. One forged witness record. He can claim anything happened there. Rourke's expression shifted from skepticism to anger. He would not risk that much unless he believed the bloodline fire could be repeated. Sana, who had entered unnoticed and now stood near the rear pillar, answered in her dry healer's tone. Not repeated. Directed. He wants a conduit he can open and close. By late afternoon, 3 more reports arrived from outer posts. Duskwalker envoys had already reached Marsh territory and River clans, with copies of the same testimony. 2 minor pacts had issued provisional statements demanding immediate conclave oversight for regional stability. The language matched Dante's petition line for line. It was not rumor. It was a campaign. Nikolai ended the session with orders that moved like steel doors closing. Couriers to every Allied Alpha with full uncut witness accounts from Nightshade scouts. Petition filed for conclave under truth wards and neutral scribes. Border watch doubled. No one traveled alone between dusk and dawn. He assigned Tavia to Celeste's direct security and, over 3 objections, added Ilyan to the legal team so he could not undermine from the hall shadows. As the chamber emptied, Celeste remained seated, fingers pressed against the new bandage at her palm. Nikolai came around the table but stopped an arm's length away. He is escalating fast, he said. He is afraid, she replied. Fear made him careful before. Now it is making him reckless. Nikolai's mouth tightened at that, the line of a man measuring how much force could be used without feeding the story written against him. If you want asylum without conclave appearance, I can seal the borders and take the political damage. And prove his claim that I am hidden evidence? Celeste shook her head. No. He built this to drag me into a room where men define me. I will stand in that room and refuse the definition. For a long beat he said nothing. Then, low, almost rough. You should never have had to become this hard this fast. She gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. I was hard. I was just trained to call it obedience. 3 days passed before the first neutral answer came back, and it was as cold as mountain rain. Conclave accepted. Trial by right granted. Venue fixed at the Moon Temple where the Bloodline event occurred. Attendance mandatory for claimant and accused. Refusal by either side would trigger sanctions and border penalties enforceable by Allied patrols. Pressure closed from every direction. Nightshade's lower halls turned into a war room dressed as legal preparation. Scribes copied statutes until their wrists cramped. Tavia drilled escort routes through temple architecture from old maps. Rourke argued logistics. Bren returned as official observer, prickly and exact, now too entangled to pretend distance. Sana monitored Celeste's scar twice daily, documenting every fluctuation in heat and glow for evidentiary record. Nikolai made one demand that surprised everyone and angered half the captains. Celeste trained in open view. He took her at dawn to a roofed practice court overlooking the eastern terraces, where mist clung low over cedar crowns. He stood beside her, never behind, and taught her how to ground breath into muscle when the scar pulsed, how to identify the difference between fear spike and power surge, how to stop treating every rising current in her body as an incoming punishment. At first, she failed so quickly it was humiliating. The moment heat climbed her wrist, memory followed. Temple bells, Dante's voice, Warden's hands, her chest locked, her focus shattered. Nikolai did not correct with force. He gave her structure. Name what is happening. Heat in the palm, tight throat. Name what is not happening. No one is holding me down, no blade, no command. Again, again, again. On the fourth morning, the scar lit, and she stayed present through the entire wave. Eyes open, breath controlled, knees steady. The air around her hand shimmered, and a narrow thread of white gold light ran across the practice rune carved into the stone rail, then faded without burning. Tavia, watching from the stair, let out a low whistle. That, she said, was not luck. Celeste's pulse hammered. Fear and pride arrived together, uneasy allies. Later, alone in her chamber, she sat at the window and pressed her forehead to the cool glass while thought unraveled in real time. I am not a weapon if I can choose direction. I am not a vessel if I can refuse the hand that tips the blade. But the body remembers cages even when the lock is gone, and every time power rises, I still wait for someone to call me dangerous and mean disposable. If I love this pull between us, will it swallow me, or will it anchor me? If I step toward him, is that desire or relief or both, braided so tightly I cannot separate them? I want his nearness. I fear needing it. I want the world where protection is not ownership. I do not know that world yet. I can learn it. I can make it. One choice at a time, and each choice spoken aloud so no one can rewrite silence as consent. That evening, she found Nikolai in the archive corridor with sleeves rolled and ink on his thumb from signing warrants. The sight was so unexpectedly ordinary that tension eased from her shoulders before she could stop it. He noticed. You look less like you want to bolt. Only every other minute. A brief, tired smile touched his mouth. Progress. The moment held, quiet and close. She could feel the bond like a live wire under skin, not painful, just insistent. He lifted his hand, then paused. May I? She nodded. His fingers settled at the side of her neck, light enough that she could move away easily. Heat moved through the bond in a clear, steady stream. Not hunger first. Recognition. Relief. His eyes went brighter, amber deepening, and for one suspended heartbeat she saw how much control it cost him to keep the moment gentle. A horn blared from the outer wall. They broke apart instantly. Rourke's voice thundered down the corridor. Breach at the north service gate. Inner ward compromised. The fortress erupted. Bootsteps hammered stone. Bells rang 3 short, 2 long. Tavia burst from a side stair with a drawn blade and shoved Celeste behind her. With me. Now. They cut through a storage passage toward the secure wing, but smoke already threaded under the next door, metallic and acrid. Not fire. Alchemical suppressant meant to dull wolf senses. Clever. Planned. 2 nightshade guards lay unconscious in the junction hall, breathing shallow but alive. One had a puncture dart in his shoulder. Tavia cursed and dragged a fallen spear across the floor to block pursuit lanes. This was inside help or forged credentials, she said. They came dressed to pass. A figure in nightshade colors stepped out of the smoke ahead, face wrapped, hands raised as if yielding. Tavia slowed half a beat. That was enough. The intruder snapped a wrist and an iron mesh whipped from his sleeve, weighted and rune-knotted. Tavia shoved Celeste sideways and took the net across her own back, hitting the wall hard with a strangled grunt as the metal tightened around her arms. Celeste turned to run and slammed into a second attacker emerging from the right arch. He smelled wrong under the borrowed cloak, bitter oil and duskwalker clove. He drove an elbow toward her ribs. She twisted, took the blow glancing, and brought her bandaged palm up on instinct. Pain lanced through the scar. White gold light burst between her fingers. The attacker screamed and reeled, not burned to ruin, but thrown backward as if struck by a hammer of heat and sound. His borrowed insignia ignited and went dark in one breath, exposing the stitched duskwalker wolf beneath. More boots pounded in the corridor. 2, maybe 3. Take her alive, someone shouted from smoke. Chains ready. Nikolai hit the junction like a storm front, claws out, shoulder half-shifted, amber gaze gone feral. He took the first man down with a single body check that cracked stone at impact and pivoted into the second with controlled brutality, stripping the chain from his hands and hurling it into the archway. Rourke and 3 wardens flooded in behind him, driving the rest back toward the gate. The fight ended in under a minute. Silence came ragged and full of coughing. Tavia knelt where she had cut herself free from the net, blood at her lip, eyes furious. 6 intruders confirmed, 2 dead from their own poison pins when capture was imminent, 4 restrained. She kicked one of the captured men onto his side, and this one kept trying to bite his tongue off before he could be questioned. Nikolai crouched by the prisoner and ripped away his face wrap. Not a common raider. Temple guard tattoo at the jawline, recently scorched and re-inked. Who sent you? Nikolai asked. The man spat, then laughed through split breath. Conclave is tomorrow at moonrise now. Schedule advanced by emergency vote. You will walk her straight onto the dais yourself. He looked at Celeste with naked malice. Chains are already under the stone, hidden as consecration hardware. She bleeds, your kingdom burns, and he becomes the one who restores order. Rourke struck him once, sharp and controlled, to shut him up before he could bite down again. Nikolai rose slowly, face gone to carved stone. Get that statement to every allied observer in the next 10 minutes. Bren, white around the mouth but steady, had witnessed every word from the corridor threshold. I heard it, he said. I sign it. Neutral seal. Tavia wiped blood from her chin and met Celeste's eyes. If he advanced the conclave, he has more in place than this team. Celeste looked down at her own shaking hand, at the faint white gold glow still pulsing through the bandage like a second heartbeat. The critical truth settled with brutal clarity. Dante had failed to take her tonight, so he had moved the board to the one room built to trap her in front of all packs at once. Tomorrow at moonrise, she would have to walk back into the same temple where she had been discarded, knowing the floor itself might already be rigged to close around her. The thought should have hollowed her. Instead, it gave her a narrow, brutal kind of focus. Then we walk in prepared for exactly that, Celeste said, lifting her chin toward Nikolai, toward Bren, toward the 4 captured men bound against the junction wall. Her voice shook once and steadied. No private chambers, no closed circle rites, every step witnessed and recorded. If they refuse those terms, we call refusal what it is. Nikolai studied her for a heartbeat that felt like a test of gravity. Agreed, he said. Rourke, chain of custody on the prisoners and weapons. Ilian, full map of Temple Dais architecture from archive vaults, including old consecration schematics. Bren, I need your seal on emergency petition amendments before sunrise. Ilian did not flinch at the assignment this time. You will have them. Through the rest of the night, the fortress moved like a living engine. Scribes copied affidavits from every witness in the corridor breach. Sana documented the flare pattern in Celeste's scar and signed it as medical evidence of reactive bloodline magic under duress. Tavia laid out route options through temple entries and marked all blind corners where an ambush team could hide. At dawn, a messenger hawk returned with a single line from the neutral rings. Amended witness demands accepted. Conclave proceeding at moonrise under public observation. By late afternoon, fog had settled low over the switchbacks as the Nightshade convoy climbed toward the Moon Temple, steel-shod wheels striking sparks from stone. Celeste rode in the center carriage with Tavia and Bren, wrapped in dark wool with her bandaged left hand resting uncovered on her knee so every guard could see she entered as witness, not contraband. The bond between her and Nikolai thrummed through the carriage wall from where he rode, flanking the lead rank, a steady pulse that sharpened her awareness but did not drown her own will. When the temple finally rose above the ridge, it looked unchanged from the night she had been expelled. Cedar beams, black sconces, crystal bells waiting for wind. Only the crowd was different. Wolves from allied packs filled the terraced approaches in formal colors, and neutral wardens stood at every arch with rune tablets in hand. Word had spread too far to bury now. Inside, the hall blazed with ceremonial light. The ancestral floor had been scrubbed to a pale sheen, but Celeste saw the repairs immediately. New inlays around the central dais, hairline seams disguised as decorative borders, and iron filings brushed into the mortar where no iron belonged near Moonrights. Her instincts sharpened along her spine. Dante stood at the claimant mark in tailored black, hair pulled back, jaw clean-shaven, every inch the controlled alpha he performed for political audiences. At his shoulder waited Luna Maris in silver gray, expression carved to disapproval. Behind them sat 3 Duskwalker elders and 2 hired legal voices from the River clans. Dante met Celeste's gaze and smiled as if greeting a wayward bride at a feast. The High Cantor struck the staff once. Conclave of allied pacts is called to order. Claims, ritual corruption, coercive sorcery, unlawful harboring, attempted abduction, and forged testimony. All speech bound under provisional truth wards once central seal is activated. Bren stepped forward before Dante could speak. He raised the iron tube, the edited crystal shard, and the signed statements from the captured infiltrators. Neutral observer record. Evidence submitted to all parties in identical copy. Any challenge to authenticity must be made before activation. Dante spread his hands, gracious on the surface. No challenge, he said. I welcome truth. The lie was smooth enough to pass in an ordinary room. Here it landed with a faint hiss against the not yet awakened runes. Proceedings began with legal arguments, clipped and sharp. Dante's counsel argued contamination of Nightshade judgment through an immediate mate bond. Rourke countered with timeline logs showing Duskwalker pursuit orders issued before border crossing. Ilian, voice flat with discipline, presented the temple schematic overlays and pointed to concealed channels beneath the renewed dais stone. These cavities, he said, tapping one marked ring, were filed as structural reinforcement 2 days ago. They align with restraint deployment geometry, not liturgical load-bearing. Murmurs ran through the hall. Dante's mouth tightened. Speculation, he said. Nightshade paranoia disguised as engineering. The cantor lifted a palm. Then activation will settle it. Claimant and accused to central marks. Witness circles hold. Nikolai turned toward Celeste, close enough for only her to hear. You do not step forward unless you choose it. She breathed in cedar ash and moon oil and the memory of humiliation that had once made her small. I choose it. They moved together to the dais perimeter and then separated by rule. He to the allied alpha ring, she to the accused mark opposite Dante. Stone cooled the soles of her boots through thin leather. The cantor began the invocation. Runes along the first circle glimmered awake. Dante inclined his head toward her, voice pitched intimately though hundreds listened. Last chance. Withdraw accusation. Come home quietly, and I can still contain the damage. Celeste held his gaze. You mean contain me? His smile thinned. You lit an ancestral hall like a war beacon. You were never built for ordinary life. Before she could answer, the floor shuddered. Ironbane chains detonated up through the disguised seams with a scream of metal on stone. Dark links whipped around Celeste's ankles and wrists, runes along each segment flaring dull red as they locked. A second ring burst around Nikolai's position, spiking upward into a cage lattice that slammed down from shoulder height and sparked whenever he touched it. 3 neutral wardens were knocked flat. The crystal bells overhead fractured and rained glittering shards across the outer circles. Chaos ripped through the chamber. Wolves shouted, half-shifted, surged, were driven back by temple guards who should have been neutral, and suddenly wore Duskwalker black under their robes. Tavia cut one down with the flat of her blade and dragged Bren behind a pillar as a crossbow bolt shattered against stone where his head had been. Celeste hit one knee as the chain around her left wrist cinched over the bloodline scar. Pain shot up her arm, hot and grinding, and the restraint rune drank at the pulse under her skin. This was the chamber he had promised her in another language, public enough to look lawful, rigged enough to be capture. Nikolai struck the iron lattice once with both hands, aura crashing outward in a violent wave that drove half the front rank backward, but the cage held, fed by Ironbane and temple ground lines. Dante turned to the hall and shouted above the panic, "Witness her volatility. Witness Nightshade aggression. For safety, I request immediate custody transfer under emergency stabilizer authority." He had rehearsed every word. Celeste felt terror rise in the old direction, toward freezing and waiting for someone stronger to choose her fate. Then she saw something precise through the uproar. The central rune remained uncovered between her and the canter stand, still dormant at its heart because no blood had touched it this round. Everyone expected Nikolai to break through first. Everyone was watching him. She stopped fighting the chain and went still. The nearest Duskwalker guard mistook stillness for collapse and stepped within arm's reach, ceremonial blade visible at his belt. Celeste moved in one clean motion, yanking her bound wrists downward to create slack, driving her shoulder into his knees and taking the blade as he fell. She rolled across the rune ring, chain link screeching behind her, and came up over the central seal. "Celeste, wait!" Bren shouted, voice cracking with fear. She did not wait. She set the stolen blade against the healed scar in her palm and reopened it herself. Blood welled bright and immediate. She pressed her hand flat to the core rune and chose direction. White gold fire erupted straight up instead of outward, a pillar that climbed to the dome and then unfurled into a vast crown of silver flame over the entire hall. Heat rushed past skin without burning it. Every forged sigil hidden in mortar, robe hems, chain locks, and witness tablets ignited in stark outline, exposed like writing under lightning. The iron-bane links around her wrists blackened and split. The cage around Nikolai cracked along 6 stress lines and collapsed in smoking sections. A second effect followed, deeper and stranger. Threads of pale light dropped from the flame crown to each speaking circle, touching throats, tongues, and sternums. The provisional truth ward had transformed under bloodline fire into full judgment binding. The cantor fell to both knees, stunned. "No false speech can stand," he whispered, awe and fear braided together. "By ancestral enforcement, lies now strike the liar." Dante recoiled half a step and masked it with fury. "She has seized the right," he shouted. "This is treason." The ward answered before anyone else could. A sharp convulsion hit him mid-word, folding him briefly at the waist. He straightened with a strangled breath, face blanching. Celeste rose, blood running down her wrist, voice carrying clear through the stunned hall. "Record my testimony under binding law." Dante Duskwalker rejected me in public to sever liability, then ordered capture for private blood extraction. He submitted edited memory evidence. He planted infiltrators in nightshade colors. He concealed ironbane restraints beneath consecration stone to force custody transfer during conclave. I submit witness names, physical proof, and his own operative statements. Each sentence rang true without backlash. Murmurs hardened into outraged silence. Dante lunged. He half-shifted as he moved, claws blackening, canines lengthening, one hand outstretched to seize her throat and drag her off the rune. Nikolai intercepted with a shoulder strike that turned the lunge into a spinning stumble, but he did not finish it for her. He checked his momentum, eyes on Celeste, giving her the opening and the choice. Dante dropped to one knee, snarling through pain and rage. "You were mine before he scented you." Celeste stepped into his line of sight, blade lowered but unwavering. I was never yours, only trapped. He pushed up again, desperate now. Without me, you are a conduit with no house, no name. She looked past him to the assembled packs, to Bren gripping the neutral seal tablet, to Ilian holding the exposed schematic high, to Tavia standing guard over the witnesses with blood on her sleeve and steady hands. My name is Celeste Frostborn, she said, and I claim it under law. Then she struck the final judgment rune at the dais edge with the blade hilt. The crown fire dropped one thread directly into Dante's chest, where the exposed forgery mark under his formal tunic blazed through cloth in a jagged sigil. Feedback tore through him as every seated lie snapped back along the ward. He cried out and collapsed fully, palms slamming stone. The cantor, shaking, forced himself upright and read from the ancestral panel now lit in silver. By witnessed sacrilege, coercive intent, forged right, and attempted unlawful seizure, Dante Duskwalker is stripped of alpha rank, stripped of conclave voice, and sentenced to exile beyond Allied borders under blood oath enforcement. Duskwalker elders shouted objections. Two managed 3 words before the truth ward struck them silent, doubled over by their own false testimony. Luna Maris stared at her son and did not move to shield him. Rourke's wardens advanced in disciplined line. Iron chains, this time plain and lawful, closed around Dante's wrists. He fought once, was forced down, and then went still, breathing hard, authority bleeding out of him in front of every pack he had tried to manipulate. As they hauled him upright, he twisted toward Celeste with raw hatred and a final rasp of disbelief. You destroyed everything. She met him without flinching. No, I ended what should never have been built. The wardens escorted him down the central aisle in chains, while the neutral witnesses repeated the sentence aloud, one by one, until the words became record, law, and memory that could not be edited again. The warden's boots faded down the central aisle, chains clinking in a rhythm that sounded nothing like triumph and everything like finality. Celeste stood in the center of the ruined dais with blood drying on her wrist and silver flame still crowning the dome, and for the first time since the ceremony that had broken her, no one reached for her without asking. Bren stepped onto the speaker ring, voice rough but steady. Neutral record, closing submission. The intercepted iron tube, the edited crystal memory shard, the infiltrator's weapons, the poison pins, the iron-bane chain segments, and the concealed channel schematics are all entered under shared seal. He lifted the tablet so every pack could see the glowing signatures. Copies have been dispatched to Marsh, River, and Mountain Rings. No private archive, no redactions. Rourke nodded to his wardens, who carried each item in marked evidence crates to the scribe tables lining the wall. A neutral medical scribe oversaw the handling of the blooded blade and Celeste's bandage, documenting both as ritual exhibits and cross-referencing Sana's previously submitted treatment record, rather than relics to be hidden. At Bren's request, Ilian stepped forward, jaw tight, and spoke into the truth ward without ornament. He admitted he had dismissed the first warning signs because he mistrusted Celeste more than he trusted the pattern in front of him, and he accepted formal censure with loss of command vote for 1 full turning year. The war did not strike him. He had told the truth. Luna Maris tried to leave before testimony closed. The ward halted her with a crack of pale light at her feet. She turned back, face rigid, and confessed she had approved emergency stonework at Dante's request, while choosing not to inspect the plans she knew were irregular. Her council seat was stripped before she reached the temple doors. She walked out under escort, silent, and never looked toward Celeste again. By first light, the final border report arrived on a relay slate. Dante Duskwalker had crossed the ash pass in chains under blood oath enforcement, witnessed by 3 Allied captains and a neutral scribe. Kellen, seized at the southern ridge while destroying pursuit logs, had testified to the original capture order and lost rank with him. The report was entered into the same public ledger as the rest. Only then did Celeste let Tavia guide her away from the hall. The private moon chamber sat above the eastern transept, circular and quiet, with one open oculus showing a thinning night sky. The floor was inlaid with old silver runes, not for judgment, only for bond stabilization. A shallow basin of moon water reflected both of them in broken light. Nikolai closed the door and remained by it, giving her the center of the room and all available distance. He did not speak immediately. He watched her breathe, watched the tremor in her fingers settle, watched her lift her chin on her own. When he crossed to her, he stopped an arm's length away. "Celeste," he said, low and clear. "May I come closer?" "Yes." He stepped within reach, then waited again. "May I touch your neck where the mark belongs?" She held his gaze. "Yes." His hand rose, broad and careful, and rested at the junction of her neck and shoulder. Warmth spread under his palm in a steady pulse that matched the bond's rhythm. He swallowed once, restraint visible in the line of his throat. "May I claim you there as my mate?" he asked, "with your full choice and no debt?" Her answer came without shaking. "Yes. Chosen." His eyes darkened to molten amber. "Then hear me as witness and vow. Mine to protect, never to own. Yours to stand beside, never above. Mate, if you still want me when dawn comes." A broken laugh escaped her, wet and incredulous. "I want you now." He bent and placed his mouth over the mark point. The bite was deliberate, not savage. A sharp pressure that flashed bright through nerve and bone. Pain sparked first, clean and finite, then transformed almost at once into a flood of heat so lucid it felt like cold water after fever. The chamber runes answered with silver gold threads rising from the floor and winding around them both, not binding limbs, only tracing the line between two chosen hearts. Celeste's knees softened. Nikolai caught her at the waist and held her upright, forehead against hers, breath unsteady. "Mine," he whispered, reverent, not possessive. She touched the fresh mark at her neck, felt it pulse under her fingertips, and the bond opened wider. Memory moved through it in clear currents, his years of control, the weight of a crown he had never worn lightly, the raw fury he had swallowed instead of using it to cage her. Her own answer poured back just as fiercely. Temple fire, exile cold, the moment she chose herself on the central rune. Nothing hidden, nothing edited. She lifted her hand to his throat. "Your turn," she said. "Do you consent?" His response was immediate. "I do." "Do you consent to my mark as equal claim?" "I do." "Do you consent to carry mine where everyone can see it?" He bared his throat completely, exposing the vulnerable line beneath his jaw. "I do." "Yours." She leaned in and bit where pulse met skin. His body went rigid for one breath, then shuddered as blood and magic answered together. A low sound broke from him, not pain alone, not relief alone, but the release of held distance finally ending. The silver gold threads brightened, crossed from her mark to his and back again, then sank beneath skin in a final spiral that left both wounds warm and already closing. "Yours," she murmured against his throat. "Mate," he said, and the word settled through the chamber like a seal finding its true groove. When the magic stilled, they stayed where they were, arms around each other, breathing in sync. No audience, no cantor, no decree beyond the one they had spoken. The bond no longer felt like a live wire pulled too tight. It felt grounded, steady, home. 12 days later, the great hall of Nightshade filled before sunset for the Tri-Pack Accord ratification. Not a wedding spectacle, not a coronation theater, but law written in full light. Bren presided from the neutral dais with 2 river scribes and 1 marsh archivist. Rourke presented the chain of custody ledger for every item recovered at temple and fortress. The Marsh archivist certified the medical clauses from Sana's previously submitted documentation. Tavia stood at Celeste's right shoulder as guard captain and witness. Celeste read the new Bloodline protocol aloud herself, line by line. No Lunarite could proceed without explicit spoken consent from both partners, repeated before neutral witnesses. All seals required dual blood acknowledgement, not unilateral extraction. Truth wards had to be keyed to both participants and an independent observer circle. Any concealed restraint or unfiled structural alteration converted a right into immediate criminal conspiracy under Allied law. The vote passed unanimously after Bren cast the final neutral seal. Then Nikolai knelt before the full chamber and offered her the High Luna torque. He did not place it until she nodded. When she turned to face the Pax, Mark visible at her neck, his at his throat, the bow that rippled through the hall began with him. Spring came sharp and green to the mountain terraces. On the night of the first open moon ceremony, young wolves lined the practice court where Celeste had once learned not to fear her own pulse. The cracked stone table from that first council now stood repaired in the legal wing, its fracture filled with silver so no one forgot what had happened there. The edited crystal shard and iron tube remained in public archive, accessible by petition, stamped with warning annotations that forgery had once worn ritual robes. No one buried the record again. Ilyan served his censure year under Tavia's command and never challenged her authority. Rourke trained joint patrols with river clans. Bren returned each quarter to audit right compliance and drink bitter tea while arguing statute language with Celeste until both of them smiled despite themselves. Luna Maris never reclaimed office. Dante's name became a caution cited in legal instruction, not a banner. Under that spring moon, Celeste stood on the upper step in dark ceremonial wool, High Luna by law and by earned trust, with Nikolai beside her and slightly behind when judgment rites were called. A frightened adolescent approached the witness stone, voice thin, and faltered on the opening words. Celeste stepped down, offered her hand, and waited until the girl took it. "Say it plainly," Celeste told her. "Your choice matters here." The girl swallowed, then spoke the new oath that had already spread across Allied lands. By moon and mark, safety first. By Celeste's law, consent is sacred. The court repeated it in one rising chorus. Celeste felt the bond at her neck answer with calm heat, felt Nikolai's steady presence at her back, felt no hand on her that she had not invited. She lifted her face to the moon, marked, loved, and unafraid, and the future before her belonged to her at last.